It's the calm before the storm for the Montreal Canadiens. The team has made the playoffs, and they are eagerly awaiting to see the seeding. With that said, in trying to find video topics to dive into in regards to the Habs and their story, I wanted to refer to this magnificent article, posted on Montreal Hockey Now about a week ago, by Mark Dumont. Here are the top 5 lessons the Canadiens can learn from the Toronto Maple Leafs and their demise. Oh boy, you know this is going to be a fun one. This article will be linked in the description if you want to go out there and read it yourself. It dives into the contrast and the failures that the Toronto Maple Leafs have exhibited throughout the course of the season and just how this varies to what Montreal was able to accomplish. Let's go out there and give a Spark Notes version of what Dumont writes about, just so Kent Hughes can take these lessons to heart. While the Montreal Canadiens continue to find success, their longtime rivals, the Maple Leafs, have finally admitted their Stanley Cup window has slammed shut. With that in mind, let's take a look at some of the lessons the Canadiens should remember as the Maple Leafs attempt to identify what went wrong. Number 1. It's a long way to the top if you want to rock and roll. The article says there is no foolproof recipe when it comes to building a Stanley Cup contending roster, and the best-laid schemes of mice and men often go awry. Take the Capitals, for example. Even with the best goal scorer in NHL history in the lineup, it took them 2 years to qualify for the playoffs. And once Ovechkin got his first taste of springtime hockey, it took him and the Caps 11 years to finally capture the cup. That's 12 years of disappointment, a heavy price to pay for any fan base. The Maple Leafs, however, never made it out of the second round, failing to win 2 consecutive series for 9 years, which eventually led to them removing talented players from the mix in exchange for more truculence, a recipe that slowly yet surely distanced them from the ultimate prize. The lesson in this case is that convincing passionate fan bases like those in Montreal and Toronto to show a little more patience isn't always easy. Winning a Stanley Cup is incredibly difficult, and some of the greatest legends in league history have failed to lift hockey's holy grail. Yeah, tell that to Iggy, tell that to Henrik and Daniel, tell that to Henrik Lundqvist. There were a number of legends who were never able to lift that Stanley Cup. And this idea of it being a long way to the top, essentially the lesson that you can learn from Toronto is just because you are that team that everybody says is going to be the next one, just because there was a Future Watch Hockey News magazine back in 2018 that said that it wasn't a matter of if the Maple Leafs would win the Stanley Cup, it was a matter of how many. This is seriously the Hockey News magazine that I bought in my senior year of high school at the convenience store, about a 50-meter walk away from my high school during lunch break when I was going out there to buy a hot dog and a Slurpee. This is the magazine. I still have it too. Plan the parade. Toronto will win the Stanley Cup. It's only a matter of when and how many. And then you also have some other really funny elements of the prospect conversation back in 2018. Who's going to be the better goalie, Samsonov or Carter Hart? Casey Middlestad is Buffalo's burning ray of light. And then you also have other prospect reports back from the day. The lesson here is that you can't rush this. The Montreal Canadiens, to their credit, it doesn't seem like they're rushing this. They're building the team the right way. The Maple Leafs, however, they tried to go too quick too fast. Lesson number 2, asset management. While there's certainly some logic involved in trading future assets for NHL-ready players, a trend that was popularized by the Lightning, there must be some semblance of asset management in place. The Leafs have traded several of their first-round picks with very little long-term value in return. Spending a first-round pick on a defensive defenseman such as Carlo while only convincing the Bruins to offer top-5 pick protection is the epitome of a high-risk, low-return type of deal. Goodness, that is a brutal way to articulate it, eh? Defensive defenseman, Brandon Carlo, there's some top 5 protection there, high risk, low return deal because Toronto is trading away a pretty significant draft pick. And they're getting, what? Carlo? Another good example of wasted assets was the acquisition of Lawton. The Leafs once again used a first-round pick to get the deal done, and while Lawton did provide the team with more energy than most of his teammates, he was inevitably dealt to the LA Kings for a conditional third. It's easy to criticize with the power of hindsight, though I'd argue both deals were rather easy to criticize in a contemporary setting as well. The Canadiens have already moved some of their first-round picks, including the deal that landed Noah Dobson. However, they ensured he would be with the team throughout his prime, and he fit the ideal group for the age range of what these core players are with. Adding players can be great, and moving first-round picks is fine, as long as deals stick to the vision put in place by management. Essentially, don't trade your firsts for guys that you will trade for thirds a year later. Don't trade your super valuable first-round picks with just top 5 protection for a defensive defenseman that isn't really going to necessarily help you win games. If you want to win the cup, you gotta believe in the rest of your team. You can't just say, oh, we're one defensive defenseman away from pulling it all together. Number 3, have a plan and stick to it. Speaking of vision, it's quite apparent the Maple Leafs struggled to establish a long-term vision with their group of talented players. Having a blind spot big enough for 2 divisional rivals should be considered a hockey sin. Now that's hilarious. They're talking about Keith Pelly just totally praising the heck out of Montreal and Buffalo, Michael Hage and Mrtka, these guys that were reportedly included in Matthew Knies trade talks. You could even argue that's still an issue, based on Kelly's recent press conference. Brian Hayes said the Leafs don't have a vision. There's no firm hired, which actually already changed. No hierarchy determined. Doesn't mean they won't get it right, but they're winging it right now. Fortunately for Montreal, sticking to the plan is the name of the game, but the pressure will eventually mount. At that point, the temptation of deviating from the plan will come into play, and it'll be up to Kent Hughes and co. to stay true to their original vision. I'd say it's a lot easier for Montreal to stay with the vision that's already been established when you consider the level of success they have been able to accomplish so far. Just acknowledging where all these young prospects are going, how quickly they're developing and advancing into NHL roles, there seems to be a lot of positivity in the way the team has been built and assembled, and that's very warranted here. Sticking to the plan doesn't seem like an issue for the Montreal Canadiens at this point. Now, the 4th lesson that the Maple Leafs can teach Montreal is that scoring is fun, but defending is crucial. The Canadiens, much like the Leafs, love to score, but it's fair to say defending usually takes a backseat when it comes to their on-ice strategy. Having decent goalies can help mask the problem, but it doesn't address the root of the issue. Kent Wilson put it best. Blocking shots is like killing rats. Doing it is preferable to not, but if you're doing it all the time, it suggests you have bigger problems. The Habs block a lot of shots because they allow a lot of shots, a situation that risks being exposed in a 7-game series. Other than that first line, most Canadiens' lines have a hard time outshooting their opponents. As for the D-men, they also tend to be outshot with the exception of Lane Hutson and Adam Engstrom. The Habs are one of the most entertaining teams in the league, and they have an affinity for late-game comebacks, but that's a symptom of a greater issue that has plagued them for several years. And then number 5, what the Leafs can teach the Canadiens is you gotta keep that pipeline flowing. The Leafs put together a relatively strong lineup. However, you'd be hard-pressed to argue they supported their lineup with a constant stream of young, talented players. Trading first-round picks like candy was part of the problem, and there were some highlights, such as Matthew Knies, but for the most part, the Leafs had to pay a high price to add mediocre players to their lineup. Having prospects such as Hage, Zarovsky, and Mooney, not to mention Pickford, Engstrom, and Reinbacher, should mitigate this concern to a certain extent for the Montreal Canadiens, but it cannot sustain the team for 10 or more years, especially if the draft picks start to dry up. The article concludes a healthy balance between drafting and using picks to improve the NHL roster is always in order. So essentially, it goes down to that same number 2 point that is mentioned here. Don't trade away all your gosh darn draft picks. Actually draft guys that can be useful long term. Ladies and gentlemen, that was Mark Dumont's list from a week ago about lessons the Habs can learn from Toronto. Link is in the description. Go out there and read this article yourself. It's a really good one. Thoughts in the comment section below as well. What do you think about all these ideas? I hope you enjoyed this video. And bye.